So you've been following the dietary advice, you've been hammering the exercise over the last month, but things are not changing quickly enough. What's going on? This video is going to give you a tip as to what the sinister little bugger that could be that's holding you back. So you may or may not have heard of cortisol before, or perhaps you've read about it in the wellness section of the Sunday papers and thought, what's its relevance to me? Well, in fact, the relevance is huge. I'm here to tell you that unless you get your cortisol levels down to more manageable amounts, manageable levels, all of your efforts into eating healthfully and exercising hard on a daily or weekly basis are really going to be futile. The effects of this little hormone are so profound that you need to know about it right now. And this is what this video is all about. So what is cortisol? Well, look, let's try to keep it really simple because it can get confusing. So cortisol is a type of steroid hormone, and it's produced in the adrenal glands, which are the tiny little glands that sit just above the kidneys and that are also responsible for producing adrenaline. I'm guessing you've probably heard of adrenaline, yeah? To get a shot of adrenaline. Well, cortisol and adrenaline actually work in tandem in the body. So let's take a step back. What is a hormone? A hormone is effectively a chemical messenger. It works with the nervous system to communicate messages throughout the body and to coordinate activities, things like puberty and sexual characteristics. They are all items that are controlled by hormones. Now, I said that cortisol is a steroid hormone. So what does that actually mean? Well, it simply means that it belongs to a group of chemicals or hormones that are all synthesized from a base compound. Can you guess what it is? It's cholesterol. And everyone thinks that cholesterol is a totally bad thing. Well, in fact, cholesterol is 1,000% necessary to be able to synthesize a whole group of hormones, including those ones such as cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, and a bunch more. So to summarize, cortisol is a steroid hormone, which means it's produced from cholesterol in the adrenal glands and works as a chemical messenger in your body to coordinate processes such as sexual characteristics and, for an example, where women put fat on their hips, men put fat on their guts. That's one of the ways that hormones communicate in the body. So what is the role of cortisol in the body, you may ask? Well, it's a good question, and I'll tell you what, the roles are numerous. So firstly, cortisol has a big role in the metabolism of fat and carbohydrate in the body. And these nutrients, as you know, are super important in maintaining your weight. So that's its first role. But probably more importantly is its role in the stress response. So cortisol is effectively known as the stress hormone. In fact, it coordinates the whole flight or fight response. You've probably heard of that one. So let me show you how it works. So your brain detects a stressful event happening and then sends a message to your adrenal glands to produce just the right amount of cortisol to get you out of that danger. And a danger such as fleeing from a tiger really needs that cortisol response. But if your cortisol levels are elevated for sustained periods, it can have quite disastrous effects to your health. Now, a few of those effects might include disturbed mood or poor sleep, but the more long-term deleterious effects include higher risk of high blood pressure, diabetes onset, and a tremendous difficulty in managing your weight. So, do you relate to this story? So you're stressed, you're tired. What types of foods do you crave? I bet it's high sugar, high fat foods, yeah? And you start to eat those foods and you start to get more stressed, and then you're stressed about eating those foods and the cortisol cluster starts. And then before you know it, in 6 months' time, you've put on a chunk of weight. Well, let me tell you that cortisol is central to that problem. And just one additional role of cortisol for men that's particularly worthy of consideration. Highly elevated levels of cortisol on a sustained period are associated with lower levels of both testosterone and growth hormone. These hormones are really important for the preservation of muscle. So if your cortisol level tends to be higher for longer periods, your muscle mass could drop. And when your muscle mass drops, your metabolism also drops, which means you find it even more difficult to manage your weight on an ongoing basis. And this is why cortisol is so important in management. So we're starting to paint a picture of just how important cortisol is in the management of your weight, right? So what causes prolonged elevated cortisol levels? Well, the simple answer is stress, okay? However, the more efficient answer or effective answer is prolonged stressful lifestyles. So to give an example of that, let's look at two comparative scenarios. So the prisoners of war, and I know this is quite left field. Do you think that they would have been under a high level of stress? Yep, tortured and tormented for months on end, and that's a real cortisol minefield, right? But on its own is not enough to create a muffin top. So compare that to modern day lifestyles. We're talking about the average man or woman that works a 60-hour week and survives on cafe lattes, cafe food and takeaway, comes home and watches endless TV because they can't sleep. They're stressed, they're trying to get across 42 social media platforms, and on top of that, they're sinking in financial debt. All of a sudden, the presence of cortisol then becomes problematic. You see, it's when cortisol is part of a cluster of lifestyle events that it typically starts to become a problem. And in this scenario, cortisol becomes effectively the conductor in an orchestra of poor lifestyle practices. And that is really the contributor to high levels of cortisol over a long period of time. So what are we going to do about this cortisol elevation, guys? You know, one of the reasons that I wanted to do this video is I, for one, know how difficult it is to achieve balance. In fact, I'm completely convinced that if it wasn't for me demanding so much of myself personally to achieve more, to be more, that I'd be shredded. It's the presence of cortisol, basically coming as a result of stress and not very much sleep, that effectively keeps this puppy fat on me. So let's have a look about practically what we could do to insert a pattern break into our current lifestyles. You see, one of the problems is we act so much out of habit, don't we? So we don't even consider the fact that there could possibly be another way to actually go about doing things. So what we're looking for is a deliberate interruption in your current lifestyle. And if you make it definitive, all hell breaks loose. Now, I'll give you an example for me. I know that if I got better at saying no to more things, no to that extra night out, no to that extra few hours at work, no to that extra drink, whatever it was, if I got better at actually cutting down and reducing my social induced stress and what I demand of myself, that I'd be much better at controlling the cortisol effects. You see, the only difference between people that demand a lot of themselves but still manage to stay healthy and the other people, which may include yourself, is that on the whole, my nutrition and fitness is on point. So I avoid the deleterious effects of cortisol. However, when you're adding cortisol into the mix with a poor lifestyle, that's where you're going to start to see the weight going on. So what we need, guys, is a pattern break, an interruption to our current lifestyle. So guys, I completely empathize with how difficult it is to find some balance. And so what I want to talk about now are some practical strategies that you can put in place to help get your cortisol levels and thus the on-flow of managing your weight into a more balanced fashion. So look, it's not always viable. It's not always financially viable or practical to go and take a holiday. So what can you actually do? Well, look, the first way is just have more fun. It sounds so profoundly basic, but when you are having more fun, your stress levels drop and thus the cortisol levels drop as well. It doesn't invoke the stress response. So one of the best ways you can tend to your cortisol levels is to just do more of the things that you actually like. So whether it's hanging out with your partner, playing with your dog, or going to the cricket, do more of that more frequently. You owe it to yourself to have more fun, and in turn, you'll get the benefit of that. The next point is to take up a better eating pattern. If your life is revolving, your nutrition's revolving around processed, high salt, high sugar, high fat foods, you're really gonna struggle to stay on top of your cortisol levels. And why is that? Well, these foods evoke a stress response from their body. They're hard to process. They're not natural. You compare that to processed foods, which don't evoke the same response from the body. The body deals with them in a much more routine fashion and gets rid of them. So adopting a healthier eating plan, especially as a dietitian, is something that I've got to recommend. And it helps you to avoid that cortisol cluster. Now, another way is to just be more active. Do you know what? Activity is actually a stressful response to the body. So in the short term, it actually evokes a cortisol response. But when you stop exercising, people who are more active actually have lower levels of cortisol compared to untrained or inactive people on an ongoing basis. And the fluctuations in their cortisol level are actually much less profound. So adopting a more active lifestyle can really help. But what else can you do? Well, look, this is where I want to talk about sleep and stress, and they go hand in hand. And just aiming for your individualized 6 to 8 hours, depending on whatever you need, levels of sleep, and actively managing your stress is one way to keep on top of your cortisol levels. And look, I'm going to do another video on how best to actually get the perfect sleep environment to guarantee you get the optimum amount of sleep for you. The final tip that I want to talk about in terms of actively managing your cortisol levels is talking about proactive ways to engage your spirituality. And this might sound a little bit strange for a bloke to be talking to another bloke about spirituality, but for me, this was something that completely changed my life. I read the book called The Power of Now, and this got me getting a little bit more in touch with my spiritual side. It led to me investigating things like yoga initially, but more recently into things like mindfulness meditation, deep breathing, and just trying to chill out, read a book, and listen to some good, calm music as an active means of trying to reduce my stress levels. So rather than just passively doing it through exercise and nutrition and the like, you can actively go out of your way to reduce your stress levels by actively seeking ways to calm your brain, which in turn lead to a drop in your cortisol levels. So there's some practical tips, some pattern breaks that you can put in place right now. You know, a funny thing happens to me every time I get to go on holidays. Firstly, I sleep almost exclusively for the first 2 days as I try to get back all of that sleep debt that I have. But within 3 to 4 days, my body actually starts to respond by looking better, even though I'm eating more, sleeping more, and training less. What's the reason for that? I put it down to my cortisol levels sinking back down to a more manageable level. So for me, this video has been really very introspective to make. I've kind of got to the bottom of how important this is to get it right, and I hope it's cut through for you. But look, there's no doubt that this 60 to 70 hour weeks and working hard is somewhat revered and saluted in today's society. But you know what? It's probably doing you more harm than you actually realize. And I think really, guys, you owe it to yourself, like I do, to try to get on top of this. Now, I've saved this super tip for last, and it's something the pet owners have known for a long time, that you know one of the greatest ways for you to get on top of your cortisol levels is to get yourself a dog or a cat, or for that matter, a fish or a bird, or whatever it turns you on. In fact, pets are shown to be the absolute best way to reduce your stress levels and thus your cortisol levels over a long period of time. They give you unadulterated love without any need for you to give anything back to them, and that's what's great about it. So get a pet. That's my final parting words. Hey guys, thanks for giving me your time and your earbuds this afternoon. And please, please subscribe and share the video as much as you can possibly do this. I'm so pumped to take these positive health messages to the world, and I really do thank you guys for your support. So if you liked it, give it a like, give it a comment, and I'll see you in the next video. P.S. I should point out that some girlfriends may or may not have been harmed in the making of this video by incurring some stressful events to boyfriends that are actually sitting here trying to film good videos for their followers.